This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our friends at Regrow, the premier cloud-based cannabis supply chain management system.
Are your SOPs directly tied to your cultivation plans? Can you easily manage your inventory and workforce and vendors from a single system? If the answer is no, then you need to talk to the team at Regrow, the premier cloud-based cannabis supply chain management system. With Regrow, you'll get all aspects of regulatory compliance built in, with the added value of workforce management, inventory, SOP management, and reporting, and metrics that allow for companies to scale successfully. If you're a cannabis company searching for a strategic business partner to help you automate your business, scale effectively, and make the supply chain work for you, you can find Regrow at regrow.io. That's regrow.io. Regrow, the premier cloud-based cannabis supply chain management system. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Andrew DeAngelo, cannabis industry consultant and strategic advisor. Andrew DeAngelo, how are you, sir?
Fantastic. Great to be with you today, Kevin.
Hey, it's an honor to have you on, man. You being, a pioneer in the space when it comes to innovation, social equity, and consulting. I know that you have a new consulting role as well for the whole industry. So congratulations on that.
Thanks. It's a lot of fun to help lots of different companies all over the country and the world build their businesses. It's a little bit different than Harborside, where I worked for 13 years building one company. So I'm excited to spread my wings a little bit.
Right. And I'm sure that the industry is super excited to have you, available to help them with their business and future growth, because it's an exciting time to be in the industry. That's for sure.
Well, the industry is about to have its biggest year ever, and I anticipate 2022 to be the peak of cannabis in the history of humankind, really. 2021, we're going to have a little bit of work to do to get everything ready for that big spike that's going to happen in 2022. But people who live in legal cannabis states right now can expect a lot more retail coming on by 2022. It's been very frustrating for a lot of people who live in communities that ban dispensaries or so forth. In almost every legal state, we've had that problem, except God bless Oklahoma. Not in Oklahoma. And something to be learned there, by the way. And that's a fun wave for all of us to ride, but we have to do it mindfully. We have to do a good job. There's still lots of threats on the horizon, and it's no time to get overconfident and complacent. Now is the time for us to be hyper focused and vigilant.
Yeah.
And our job is to heal. Really is what we do is we heal the people, we heal the nation. That's what plant medicine does. And we're just the animals that move the seeds around,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. We don't want to get over cocky. There is good momentum, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And we know that we've lived through a pandemic and we've seen a lot of unprecedented things happen where we know we're in a position where anything can happen, right? And one thing that we need to focus on, and I know that you've been huge advocate on it, being the co-founder of Last Prisoner Project, is that social equity component, right? And rewriting those wrongs that have been done, and really focusing on the people that have really helped kind of pave the way for where we're at today, right? With the time that they've served, or the injustice that they've felt, with the plant.
Absolutely. There's two components to it. Social equity is certainly one of them. Social justice is sort of the foundation for social equity. So for your listeners, social justice is about getting people out of prison. It's about correcting laws that are clearly racist. It's about making the criminal justice system fair and equitable for everybody. That's the criminal justice system. Now, and that's what social justice is for. Social equity is about increasing ownership in our industry for people of color. So right now we only have 4% ownership in our industry of people of color, and that's shameful,
It is
really.
shameful, yeah. Especially when minorities, primarily blacks and Hispanics, were targeted, right, and demonized for using the plant. You know, back during the Madness Reefer and that kind of demonizing campaign that they ran.
Still happening. The demonizing campaign is still happening now. So we have a lot of work to do, to heal. Last Prisoner Project is really on the social justice side. We don't do a lot of work on the social equity side, but we're trying to get people out of prison. We're trying to cannabis people out of prison. Most of those folks are people of color. Some of them aren't. We help them all.
Right.
And we want people's records expunged so that they don't have that ball and chain carrying around with them that prevents them from getting an apartment or a job or a loan or going back to school or basically just functioning in society. When you have a criminal record, it is very, very hard to reintegrate yourself into being a law-abiding citizen in society again. We need to make that easier for not just cannabis prisoners, but everybody, because the recidivism rates are terrible for our criminal justice system. It's a revolving door, and it's designed that way.
Right.
We have to deconstruct that evil design and replace it with one that's just, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to have criminal justice systems. There's crime, and we have to protect society, but we have to do that in a good way.
Yeah.
And so that's, and then we also help prisoners re-enter society. And we're not the only group, doing that work. There's KHV Cannabis, there's the Weldon Project, there's lots of folks doing that work, and they all deserve our respect, our support, and people to plug in and help, because it's going to take us many years and many millions of dollars to do this work. The way you get people out of prison is it's basically lawyers and legal work. And most of those lawyers that work for Last Prisoner Project do so pro bono. But once we start getting into really hard cases where somebody's serving life for a joint or something in Louisiana, then, we have to leverage some hard resources to get enough people on the team to make that happen. So
Right. Thank you. I want
mhm.
to thank you for making that distinction between the social equity component and the social justice, because sometimes those can kind of get construed or be spat out this in meaning the same thing, but they're not. So that's a really good clarification. And when it comes to the work that you're doing in the social justice side, and then like you mentioned the reentry services, it's really incredible. And of course there are others doing it, so we do commend those entities as well. And I got to tell you, I mean, I had Evelyn LaChapelle on recently, and I've talked to Dante West, and these are competent, smart individuals that just had the unfortunate luck of getting caught up in the system that's inherently faulty and wrong.
Yeah.
And
They didn't
so
do anything wrong. Dante didn't do anything wrong. Evelyn didn't do anything wrong. They're brilliant, smart, early in their careers still, even though that they served some time, but they're still relatively young in their careers, brilliant people, as you discovered. And, these are folks that should be managers in companies and organizations, leaders in companies and organizations. Dante has ambitions to be an actor and a creative person.
nice.
So and they're both working for LPP. Evelyn is one of our reentry coordinators. Dante, I think, is doing a little bit of work for us too. We also got him some work with a cannabis company in Oakland. So, there's so many good, talented people locked up for weed. And it's a real shame because our country needs every single person. Our communities are at the local, state, national level. We need all the talent on deck right now. The human race is in a existential crisis, and we can't be locking up good people for weed when we need them out here rolling up their sleeves, helping us all get it done.
Mm-hmm. 100%, man. So again, I just really want to commend you and others in the industry that are making that top of mind, and the companies that are thinking about it, because again, we're seeing a lot of great momentum, the most public support we've ever seen. I mean, even in Texas, the Texas legislature is meeting, and top five issues, marijuana is number four, so,
Wow.
but I know. So, but it's important to keep that in mind, and we appreciate the work you're doing. And
Are you
so
based in Texas, Kevin? Is that where you are?
I'm in Dallas, Texas.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Cool.
Yeah, so it's an interesting time, but it's so great and encouraging to see that. And I wanted to ask you, Andrew, so like, I mean, you're one of the founding fathers in this space, right, when it comes to legal cannabis. I know that they say your brother Steve, of course, but you also, I mean, you're part of the Harborside crew, and everything that you've been doing in different aspects of the industry. And so I want to ask you, like, what is your thoughts of like where we're at in 2020? You talked about or 2021, you talked about the peak that we're going to hit in 2022. Like did you expect the momentum to happen this fast?
Well, I thought that once we could get laws passed to legalize cannabis in more and more places, that momentum would build very quickly. So the rate of speed that we've seen with the momentum doesn't really surprise me. But there are a lot of unintended consequences that I did not anticipate to the extent that they have created constraints within our ecosystem. So a lot of it comes down to bad public policy and bad frameworks that we're seeing everywhere. And the unintended consequences is legacy people have been working with this plant for a long time, or people of color who've been working with this plant for a long time, cannot overcome the barriers of entry to get licenses and participate in the legal industry. And those folks are all being driven underground and back into the legacy market, which then has to compete with the legal market. And then you've got investors and suits who are very upset at those folks for taking market share away from their legal company that they spent a lot of money on. Then they go knock on the door of law enforcement and they say, hey, you got to go after these people. They're not legal and I'm legal and they're hurting me. And then we have the danger of Prohibition 2.0 being launched on the side of licensed
Right.
people in the legal industry against those that are unlicensed. And everybody is essentially doing the same thing with the same plant.
Right.
So this is an unintended consequence we have to fix. And the way that we do that is we have to probably use a little bit of law and a little bit of regulation. I would hope that they are designed intelligently, which they haven't been up to this point. But one thing, like California did something really interesting a couple years ago. It wasn't with cannabis; it was with corporate governance, and they passed a law, and the law said that every publicly traded company, Fortune 500 company. I wish they would have done it for all companies, but they just did it for the big companies. They stipulated that at least one board of director members of that company had to be a woman.
Huh. Okay. Yeah.
That's all
That
they
makes
did.
sense.
That's all they did. They just said, you got to have one woman. And that's the law. And if you don't do it, we're going to come after you. And guess what? Overnight, everybody had a woman on their board. It
Right.
was an example of a regulation that's not super heavy handed. Okay. They're not saying you have to have 5 women on the board.
Right.
They're not saying you have to have exactly this or exactly that. They're just giving a broad mandate to get women on the board.
And I like that because, here's the thing. When it comes to large, like you said, the S&P 500, right? The bigger companies that are doing really well, there's tons of talented, smart women in those organizations, right? And so to force the hand of the board and to really include representation on the female side is key, right? Because you want that person to be right for the job as well. And of course, in those entities, there's going to be someone. So that's good that they did that. That is good.
Yeah, and I'd like to see that with diversity, people of color. I'd like to see that in cannabis. I'd like to see some of these frameworks include very broad mandates that force folks to be diverse. Because once you have, look, we had a board at Harborside that was mostly women. The leadership team at Harborside, when we owned and operated the company, almost all women, several women of color in very high positions. Okay, because and it was not easy creating that leadership team. You have to really work at it.
Right.
Okay? You have to really want to do it. And you have to create policies and procedures, and you have to let everybody know that this is a big priority for you. And if you lean into it and you do that work, it can be done. And if we create mandates that require that work to be done,
Mm-hmm.
then the medium becomes the message at that point. Once the people are in the boardroom, then they have a voice for all those constituents that work in that company. Every person of color now has a voice at the board level. Every woman in that company now has a voice at the board level. And if we did that, if you look at all the big cannabis companies, all white male boards, pretty much. Now Harborside has a new board, all white male. All white male. Not something I would have done, not something Steve would have done, but it is done. And we need, and it's trending in the wrong direction. Okay.
Right.
Because
well, it's because there's so many new entrants that are coming in that are used to operating in the same type of traditional legacy ways, where traditionally they have a board that are filled with all white males, right? And we're seeing a lot of these professionals move over, which is a good, and I don't want to say bad thing, but we've got to make sure that we're, to your point, I think what you're saying is incorporating that diversity and that culture that the cannabis industry has projected for so long, right?
Yeah, and if we have these mandates, when those folks come over from traditional retail or from, I got all these clients right now, they're in the petroleum industry. I've got clients that are in the restaurant and hospitality industry. They got to pivot. There's only so much oil we're going to be able to pump and burn for the next whatever years. It's going away. Bye-bye.
Hemp, biofuel, right?
Yes,
I mean,
right. Good riddance. But
yes.
all those folks know that they have to pivot, the smart ones anyway. And so what I want to do is I want to say, okay, great. We need the talent to scale the industry from all these other industries, but you can't just jump over and bring all the other bad behavior from that industry into our industry. There needs to be like something you go through in the middle. Maybe it's a mandate like we've just been talking about. I don't know. Maybe you have to go smoke weed for 30 days at a retreat before you get to be in the cannabis industry.
that brings up a good point. I want to ask you, some of these entrants and these professionals that are coming in, like I'm sure with your being in your position of like, you know, the industry's strategic consultant, like have you come across executives or management leaders who do not even like have never touched the plant, smoked it, consumed it? And if so, is that kind of strange to you?
Most of the people that reach out to me say, not really into cannabis, don't have a problem with it. I would like to make some money with it. Most people, and particularly on the new entrant side, right? And which when you're a consultant, you get most of your deal flow is new entrants.
Yeah.
Or, you know, sometimes the big companies call me up and they want help digging them out of a problem. But mostly it's the new folks that are trying to get in and so
I like your idea of the retreat, 30 days.
Yeah.
30 days, and you need to try this thing because I mean, really, that's why you see so many resilient cannabis operators in the industry, and all the red tape and challenge that they're dealing with both at the federal and state level, right? When it comes to all these policies and red tape and but they're still resilient because of the passion for the plant. They want people to access the plant because they know the economic, medicinal, and environmental benefits that it offers, right? And so I think you're onto something with that, man. That should be maybe one of your mandates to work with you as a consultant, you know.
Well, I just, you know, it's said a little bit in jest, of course, but there's something to it because look, this plant medicine that's how I became a peaceful warrior. Before I had this plant in my life, I was not a peaceful warrior.
Same.
I was a young kid. So my older brother, of course, it came into my life when I was a teenager. But I was not a peaceful warrior before this came into my life. I was an athlete. I wanted to be a lawyer.
What sport? What sport, Andrew?
I was a tennis player.
Okay.
My dream was to be a basketball player, but I grew up in Washington D.C. and I just wasn't a good enough athlete to be a basketball player in Washington D.C. And then I noticed that there weren't any black people playing tennis, so I thought maybe I have better luck over there. And the truth be told, I was an above average athlete, but not, a good enough athlete to be a professional athlete, which was, of course, my dream. But when you're an athlete, you're very competitive. Everything's very transactional. You're either winning or losing. Everything's black or white. You just want to kill the other person and win.
Yeah.
And it develops this, this mentality.
Imagine wrestling since 5 years old in a combat sport. I mean, that was what I did growing up. Yeah. So I totally relate.
Yeah, right. You get this mindset. And then, when it comes time to put up the gloves or whatever it is and go be a real person and make a living, that competitiveness and that transactionality of that world oftentimes propels you into things like law or business that perpetuates some of these inequities that we've been talking about. Thank God I had plant medicine that interrupted that for me, and I was able to change. It's always traumatic when you have that identity crisis and you're like, whoa, I just smoked this plant. Everything's changing in my belief system and what I'm seeing and what I'm believing. And now I got to go deal with that. And that's not always easy. You have to walk down that path for a little while. I call it the path of the peaceful warrior. But once you're on that path, and cannabis is, of course, and other plant medicine is the way that we sustain ourselves as we walk down the road less traveled. It's the way that we heal ourselves, inspire ourselves, gives ourselves energy, give ourselves rejuvenation. That's how cannabis people, that's what we've learned, right? And this is what we're trying to teach to everybody else, because we're watching everybody else spiral down into this place of hyper competitiveness, divisiveness, anger, even hatred. And at the root cause of all that, we just have stopped trusting each other. We just don't trust each other.
It's so sad, right? And that, like, discussion is not prevalent as it should be, right? And reaching across the aisle and trying to understand where the other person is coming from, even if you don't agree with them, agree with their beliefs or whatever. It's just even that willingness to come together and have a conversation has kind of faded, and we see that especially in the political realm, right? When it comes to how polarized both parties are when it comes to them working together. And I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, if more people look to the plan, I think that their eyes would be more open and they'd be a little more inclined to listen and be more self-aware as well,
Well, we know what happens when the Capitol gets stormed and lawmakers get really scared and really angry because their workplace has been breached. Right. We know what that looks like, and we know what that feels like. We don't know what it feels like, or what it looks like, or what we might learn from everybody smoking a joint together in the Congress and in the Senate. And before we start even reaching across the aisle with our ideas or our solutions, let's reach across the aisle with some joints, and do that first. And then when everybody's good and stoned in the room, maybe we can say, hey, what about this, situation with taxes?
Right. Or you know what? That actually does make sense. And I know it goes against what my party is doing, but maybe there's a way we could work together on this because we both want the same thing. And ultimately, we want the best, what's good for the people of our nation.
Right. And when I tell people these ideas, because I really do believe that we can use this as a sacrament to overcome political divisions, and that if everybody had a smoke session or however you want to consume it, and then sat down and talked, and even if you had to have another maybe more sober session after that talk just to distill everything that was said in the stone talk,
Right.
um, I think it would be so much more productive than a quote unquote debate that is already over before it
The
begins.
debates are so ridiculous. You get 30 seconds to spout out a huge issue and topic that relates to every person in the nation, and then they quit to go to commercial. They come back. I mean, the format of the debates are ridiculous.
No, I mean it's so we need to transform all of this, right? And
Right.
that's why we work with plant medicine, because I don't know how to do it with an intellectual argument. We can go to all of the people who think differently than we do, and we can do PowerPoints, and we can do historical arguments, and we can do manifestos, and we can do white papers. And you know what? I bet we don't turn a single one of them that way.
Right.
But if we smoke some weed together and we're out in nature and we're like doing some common activities together, maybe it's breaking bread, maybe it's fishing, maybe it's bowling, I don't know what it is, but the experience of doing the same thing together while a little stoned and
Hmm.
taking all the pressure off of, this is who I am, this is who I represent, this is who you are, and this is who. No, we're all human beings, we're all Americans. Before we even talk about all that, let's smoke some weed, let's play some bowl, let's figure out a way to do something together that's the same thing.
Right.
And then let's just see how we feel after that. And maybe we feel a little bit less at each other's throats after that. Maybe it's just a little.
Hmm.
Maybe it's like you go home from after that and go, honey, what do you think about them left-wing people? I don't know. Or what do you think about those right-wing people? They seem like me.
Right. We're human. And what you're touching on, I think really at its core is it's just like if you were to get married, right? Or get into a serious relationship with someone, it's like you got to be in a good place yourself before you give yourself to someone else, right? And that's kind of what I think you're alluding to in that how this plant medicine helps with that. It helps you really self-reflect, be more self-aware, be more conscious of your words and your actions towards others because you feel this sense of peace when you consume cannabis. And that's
Right. And many other things you feel. One of the things that I learned about euphoric states of consciousness is euphoric states of consciousness caused me to gain a deeper appreciation for life itself. And and cannabis does this, other visionary plants do this, but when you feel that euphoria of like, hold on, life is good. I feel good. I feel relaxed in my body, my stress, the modern world. Hold on a second. Life is good.
I'm
Life,
waking up another day. I have
yeah,
another day,
life is good.
Yeah.
And we really need to get back in touch with the appreciation of just life itself, not our political views, not what's going on with our social media feeds, not all that attention sucking that all those big tech companies have got us all
It's
strung.
toxic. It's toxic, man.
Well,
Yeah.
we're all strung out on it. Well, all of us are. I am too. How do you not be strung out on this thing?
I know.
And live a life and make a living these days. And it's a real problem. Okay. And it's one of the things cannabis can help with, right?
Hmm.
And so we have to just keep carrying these messages out. I don't know when we'll be able to peacefully walk in pardon me, peacefully walk into the U.S. Congress and get them all stoned on a voluntary basis. What happened last week was obviously not voluntary.
Right.
And if you went down to Congress right now and you floated this idea to them, they would laugh you out of the room and they think you're batshit crazy. But I'm like, what's crazy after last week? What's
Exactly.
last
Exactly.
week?
The goalpost keeps moving on that one. So yeah, what is
So
crazy at
at
this
a
point?
certain point, getting everybody stoned in the halls of in the Congress is going to actually seem like a less radical idea.
Right, right. No, I totally hear you. And I want to touch on one you kind of you talk about this the being a peaceful warrior now, right? And I know that you have a series Weed Warrior in with Playboy now, right? So is that kind of playing off the notion of you being this peaceful warrior now that you know not that you've found cannabis recently, you've been consuming for years, but that how you made that transition, is that what that series is about?
Well, it could be. The Weed Warrior series is just me telling stories from the Prohibition days, really, and sharing some of that adventure with the readers of Playboy. So the Road to the Peaceful Warrior, of course, is a famous book by Dan Millman, The Road of the Peaceful Warrior. I believe it was Dan Millman, and you
I've
know,
never read that book. I need to read that.
yeah, it's a pretty cool book. It's more about meditation than cannabis, right? It's about really, but what I, look, we've got serious enemies and adversaries. We have a serious problem with getting legalization over the hump at the federal level. We have serious problems with racism, white supremacy, hatred in this country. We have
Opioid addiction.
opioid addiction. I mean, just name it. We could spend the whole program just naming all the problems that we're having right now. So there has to be some antidote to this, and and so our message that we can't fight a war. What are we going to do? Fight wars with those QAnon people and those white racists in the streets of the Capitol? We're really going to fight a war with them? They're better armed than we are. It'll be a bloodshed. It'll be a bloodbath. It'll be terrible. No, I don't want to fight a war with
No.
them. Do I want to run for office and do all this political work and go through that? No, I don't particularly want to do that. So how do we change it? Well, the only way I know how to change all of this terribleness that's happening without fighting a war or resorting to violence or resorting to brutally political tactics at the political level is to flood the people with plant medicine. It's the only way I know. We have to change people from the inside out. We're not going to change people from the outside in. We have to change people from the inside out. And you do that with plant medicine and you do that with storytelling like we're doing right now. And that's the only two ways I've learned how to do it.
And I want to dissect, really go deeper on this, because Andrew, you make a good point, but I want to put it in context for people that maybe have never consumed cannabis or against it or whatever, because when you talk about like cannabis being the resolution, of course, from the plant medicine side of it, right? There's tons of medicinal benefits when you really start to look at all these different minor cannabinoids and what they do, right? And as they marry with your endocannabinoid system, because we're biologically inherently married with this plant. But outside of that, like, for human race overall, I mean, there's so many other benefits. You've got the economic benefit that we're seeing, currently in different states that are adult use when it comes to tax revenue and other things. You see the environmental benefits, right? Because hemp itself is one of the best plants that you can grow because of the amount of CO2 emission that it brings in, how it enriches the soil. So it truly is, it could be a solution to a lot of these problems that we're seeing, right?
Absolutely. Just think about anything that you are wearing right now on your body. It's probably cotton or a synthetic material, can be made from hemp. The house that you're living in, probably most of it's made from concrete and wood, could all be made from hemp. The fuel that you put in your car can be made from hemp. And even the rocket ship fuel that Elon Musk is using to go to outer space, you can make from hemp. So anything that you can make from a tree, a cotton plant, or petroleum, pretty much you can make with hemp or other plants. So the raw materials, the factories of the future over the course of the next 100 years are not going to be coal fire plants. They're not going to be fossil fuel powered plants. They're going to be farms. They're going to be farms. And what's going to happen is, like you mentioned, all the carbon that hemp can sequester in the soil will be, once you have millions and millions of acres of hemp planted, and all those plants are being converted into clothing and paper and fuel and food and fiber, you start to pull a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere and get it back into the earth. It's very simple. We took too much carbon out of the earth and we put it into the air. Now our job is to take the carbon out of the air and put it back in the earth. The only way you can do that is with plants. So lots of plants, trees too. We're going to have to plant trillions of trees.
And let those trees grow, because we can use hemp, as you mentioned earlier, to make clothing, textiles. We don't need to wait 100 years or however long a tree takes to grow and cut it down for cotton.
I mean, you got these quick growing pine trees. I don't know how long they take, 10, 20, 30 years. And big business down the South, right? They've been doing that for a long time. And it's crazy. You can grow in one season.
Right. 90 days. Yeah.
Yeah, you could grow in one season. The difference is with trees, particularly the first time you cut them down, you don't have to pay for them.
That's right.
So the margins are very nice when you don't have to pay for the raw material. When you have to grow the raw material and hire people to grow it for you and harvest it for you and all that, it's more expensive. But what's happening with these other industries that are polluting is they're not building the cost of the pollution into the product.
No.
And that's where if we did that, Walmart would not exist, Home Depot would not exist, none of this would exist. And
we would have our own hemp patches in our backyard, and they would be more communal, people, right? I mean, that's kind of what I would.
It would be it would be a much more hyper local, right? Because transporting hemp long distances is not very efficient. So yeah, I mean, it's a complete transformation of the economy. If you just look at the food industry right now, the food industry is highly centralized, destroying the small farmer. They're all monopolies. If you want to grow soybeans, you have to grow a certain kind of soybean using a certain kind of pesticide at a certain time, and you have really no choice because of big ag business and the monopolies there in forcing everybody to do that. And we simply haven't enforced the antitrust laws against them. So these and it's a complete transformation of our economy that we're talking about here. And we're starting it, obviously with disrupting illegal cannabis commerce and making it legal, but then that's going to spread out to industrial areas and all the rest of it. And it's going to happen enormously quickly. I mean, when it's just things are moving so fast in the world of both industrial and commercial and medical cannabis right now, it'll make your head spin.
Yeah. And I think you touched on it earlier about like some of the challenges. I think you were kind of alluding to Prop 64 in California with some of the challenges that it takes to run and operate a cannabis business, especially even just having the capital to do so, and how the illicit market is continuing to thrive, right? But like, so as more states are coming online with cannabis, what would be your advice and some of the key learnings that you've seen in California and maybe other states that could be applied to these newly emerging states?
Great question. I wish more people asked me that question. There's some it's not hard. It's not really hard to improve these frameworks. One, the taxes are too high at the state level and at the local level. When taxes are too high and the price of legal weed is more than 10% higher than the cost of legacy weed or underground weed, consumers aren't going to come into the legal shop. They just will not. And that's why in California, 75, 80% of the cannabis transactions are still in the illicit or legacy
It's
market.
that high? Wow, I didn't realize it was that high.
Yes. Same thing in Colorado. You still have half the state has bans in it. Michigan, I think it's 70% of the state have bans in it. New Jersey just made that mistake. So don't make the taxes too high.
Number one,
maybe the first year or two, the taxes are zero. Get people into the market. Get them to understand that walking into a legal dispensary is a better experience for them than going down to their
man,
dealer.
that may be a hard sell. And the only reason I say
Very
that is
very hard sell. We love our dealers.
well, and just that's kind of the incentive for some states that haven't come online, because they see their neighboring state and all the revenue that they're bringing in, and so that I think that's one of the core reasons why some states that you never think would even consider are considering, right?
I know, but they are solving one problem but making another one bigger. Yes, they're solving the problem is they need more tax revenue. But the bigger problem is they're hamstringing the legal business and they're empowering the illicit market.
Right.
So, and that's that doesn't work on a public policy level. So that's number one, taxes. Number two, do not let the local people ban.
That meaning the zoning laws, municipalities.
Well, no, let them zone however they want, but do not let them ban dispensaries. Do not let them ban licensing the supply chain. Okay. Oklahoma did that. In Oklahoma, if you're in a town and you hate cannabis and somebody wants to open a cannabis dispensary, you have to let them do it. The state says you cannot ban it, right? That's smart on the state.
Right.
Because the state didn't want to deal with a whole bunch of activity in the illicit market. The other thing Oklahoma did that was really smart is it cost $2,500 to get a license.
And that's feasible, right? What is the cost in California?
Oh my God. $150,000 get a license.
That's insane. That's so crazy. Wow.
So in Oklahoma, they're like, anybody can get one. We're not going to let you ban it. And we're going to let the free market figure this out, because we believe in the free market here in Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma has other problems. They have way too many dispensaries. They have a lot of fragmentation. Okay. But I'd much rather have that problem, because it will work itself out. There will be consolidation. There'll be mergers, there'll be acquisitions, there'll be consolidation.
Just like a capital market would work itself out, right? You're gonna have winners and losers.
There'll be winners and losers and so forth. And the losers, it'll be hard for them and it'll suck. But there's losers now. With all these bad frameworks, many more losers. So those are the two big lessons. Make your taxes right. Don't let the local people ban it. If you do just those two things and nothing else, you're going to outcompete most of the other states. The other recommendations I would have is develop your lab testing program with smarts and intelligence, not with hysteria and fear. Because, right now in California, if you took an organic apple that you bought at Whole Foods and you took it to the cannabis lab, it would fail. If you took the bottled water from Fiji and you took it down to the cannabis lab, it would fail. If you took the air that we're all breathing in California and you took it anywhere in California and you took it down to the lab, the cannabis lab, it would fail. So it's really not fair that the organic apple people don't have to pass the same test that we have to pass.
And
A
you're
lot
talking
more
about
people,
all the pesticides and mycotoxins and things like that, or
everything, right?
yeah.
Now, I'm a big believer in testing for pesticides, but you can't test for pesticides in weed and not do it for tobacco and apples.
Right.
You
Right.
just can't, okay? Or you have to have some designation that consumers can easily understand, like organic. And we can't use the word organic because the word organic is trademarked by the FDA and they won't let us use the word organic. So the consumer, we can't say organic cannabis to give the consumer a quick boom. Oh, that's organic, no pesticide. Boom, I know that's organic. I know that's got no pesticide. And we can't do that. So, and these testing regimens, they're testing for pesticides, they're testing for heavy metals, they're testing for these things at parts per billion that they would never test any other product at. And
they're picking on the industry. Yeah.
They're just picking on the industry, right? And is it fear? Yeah. Is it hostility to the industry? Yeah, it's a little bit of that too. And it's just this prohibitionist muscle memory that's in these politicians and their staff. And we're losing a lot of those battles, I'm afraid to say. We won the war of legalization. Hallelujah. It only took 100 years to do it, but we're losing the battle on these frameworks, pretty badly all over the place. I just can't believe New Jersey, did the local bans after all the evidence all over the place that is just a disaster.
What was that? I missed that. What was local bans that you're talking about?
New Jersey, in their law that they passed, has a provision in it that says the local towns.
Yeah.
They can vote to ban
Damn.
cannabis in their town. Okay. Well, you couldn't ban prohibition in your town. You couldn't say, "Oh, sorry, prohibition. We want weed in our town. Fuck you." You couldn't do that. If you did that, you would all go to jail. Everybody in the town for a long time.
Right. No, that's a great point. That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
And it's like, so now we're going to let people opt out of legalization, but we didn't let them opt out of prohibition. That's bad public policy. Period.
That is. That's a great way to put it. I never thought of it that way. If they have that power and the state and federal government allows them to do that, why could we not do it in reverse? Right? Like
they would never, because it doesn't
work. I know why, right? But I'm saying, speaking out loud, I'm just like,
it bastardizes the whole system.
Right.
Okay? You can't have a patchwork of prohibition and not prohibition. It's got to be one or the other, or the thing doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Now, you still have dry counties for alcohol in some places in this country, from sort of the leftovers of this problem from the alcohol people. And that's still with us. I mean, places in Utah, maybe places in Texas still have dry counties.
I'm sure there's dry counties in Texas. Yeah, I don't know which ones, but definitely not in Dallas.
So it's a real ongoing
issue
process. A real ongoing process. Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you one other thing, Andrew, and that is, as a consultant, again, you're giving really good advice, and your points about states coming online, well taken. Now, what would you advise companies that are trying to weather the storm, post COVID, post pandemic, entering 2021? And I mean, I say post COVID, but who knows what this year will bring, right? So how would you kind of consult and navigate through these waters?
Well, what I told people when the pandemic first hit was, I think we're going to be okay because I don't think we're going to get shut down. I didn't know that we'd be deemed an essential service per se, but I was pretty confident that we weren't going to shut down, because the argument is, well, what? You want everyone to buy their weed in the illicit market during a pandemic, that'll make the pandemic worse. At least the dispensaries can do curbside pickup, social distancing, make everybody wear a mask, take their temperature before they go into the building. That was one of our protocols when the thing was peaking. So I think we're doing that now again. So it's a safer way to distribute cannabis in a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't too worried about that. What I did advise people on is conserve your cash. Okay, don't launch a whole bunch of new initiatives that you might have been doing before the pandemic, new products launches, new things that cost cash that might be risky. You might want to conserve that to get through the pandemic. Our transactions cost more. We have to clean a lot more. We have to have social distancing. It takes longer to do a transaction. It takes a little bit more staff hours to do each transaction. So it's costing us a little bit more. And so you want to conserve your cash. And when the pandemic hit, cash constraints were already dogging cannabis companies pretty hard. So that was number one. Number two, take care of your employees. Make sure they have all the protective gear they need. Go above and beyond the CDC recommendations and give them bonuses. They're frontline workers at this point.
Right.
And take care of them. Make sure that most of our bud tenders, most of our trimmers, most of our people are working class people. We pay them better. That's great. But they're still working class people, which means the ripple effects of the pandemic will have impacts on their households and their families. And we need to be a source of stability for those households and those families. So I encourage people to give bonuses. I'm proud to say Harborside did that. I'm not sure how many others did that, but I'm proud to say Harborside did that. Not to the extent that I would have liked, but we did do it because the government's really failed people on stimulus in a big way. And
oh man,
and you know, so we have an obligation to pick up that slack. We in the cannabis industry have an opportunity to be an industry that doesn't just look after our shareholders. That's gone. Being any industry, your mission is 100% focus on your shareholders. Fuck you, get out. That's just not the world we live in anymore. Sorry, over.
Yeah.
You have to be a community-based organization. Shareholders are part of that community. Yes, we love our shareholders. You're going to get your money, but we're going to spend some of your money on community too. And you know what? You're going to be okay with that.
Right.
And that's the big change we have to make because those folks are usually not okay with that. And they're very used to founders and CEOs basically kowtowing to their every wish and whim.
And to that point, I mean, that is so true in that, and there's many unintended consequences that happen when you just hyper focus on the bottom line and making your shareholders happy. It's a detriment to the organization in terms of its culture, your sense of feeling of worth at the company, because you want to be creative, you want to have ideas, but if this is the mode of operation, to your point, if the president or the CEO is just beckoning to the call of the board every quarter, some of those ideas and you kind of feel like you're just another number and you're just turning a knob. So
it is real, man.
It's real.
I can tell you from firsthand experience. Once Harborside started taking investor money, and we had to hire a real CEO, quote unquote, real CEO, although my brother Steve was killing it in that role pretty good, because the investors wanted a CEO to look after them. And I was still part of the company at that time. And I saw the CEO come in. I worked very hard to onboard the CEO and transfer our ethos to that new CEO. And I saw that new CEO spend 95% of their time on the phone with investors. They spent maybe 1% of their time embedded with the team in the business units.
Jeez. Yeah.
Maybe 1%. So this is what happens. And and you talk about culture. Culture is something that I believe eats strategy for breakfast. I'm a Peter Ducker guy, and it eats strategy for breakfast. And I went into that shop every day for 13 years, and that was the main thing I worked on was culture. I wanted my team to feel connected to our organization and to feel that they on a mission that's bigger than any of us are, and that they were going to pay as much attention as they possibly could to the people coming in our door and to the products that we were offering them. It's just not happening in the industry right now. No one's talking about culture in any kind of serious, widespread ways. There are a few groups that work on it and that care about it. None of the MSOs are doing it. None of the big companies are talking about culture. The consumer is basically being told, well, you can only get legal weed in a few spots. I'm one of them. F you, come here and get it if you want. If you don't, I don't care. That's the general attitude. It's not that they don't want to care about their customers. There's just no energy or resources left to care about them by the time they've complied with all the compliance, and by the time they've taken care of the shareholders, and by the time, you know, they've figured out how to cut costs. There's just nothing left for the customer, and there's very little left for the team. And we've seen massive layoffs in the cannabis industry in the last year or two, as you know, the capital markets in Canada crashed, and we had, you know, a lot of investors got burned because they, you know, the cycle, there was too much exuberance. They were too exuberant. It's not our fault you were exuberant, man. It's not our fault you were greedy and you put all this money in too early. But that's what happened. And so a lot of them got burned, and then they got really pissed off at operators. And they took over their companies and, you know, laid off a whole bunch of people to try to make them profitable, and that didn't work. And then, you know, the stock kept going down and nothing seemed to work. And then all of a sudden, when everything bottomed out 9 months ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, people started to say, maybe we need to work on the fundamentals of our business.
When their hands are forced at that point, right? Yeah.
And then people started shedding assets that weren't valuable to them or that they weren't paying attention to. They stopped all this crazy overpriced acquisition activity. They started to focus on their supply chain and making it better. And they started either cutting production or making it more efficient, or they invested in a better greenhouse that would give them better output. And they started to work on the fundamentals. And we got a little lucky with COVID, and we got some growth there, even though we laid a lot of people off. And now the stock market, the stock prices are starting to recover because that authentic growth is starting to be expressed in the reports and the revenue reports and the net profit reports. And we're still not profitable, generally speaking, as an industry, but we're that close, man. And if we get rid of 280E,
what a freaking knife in the side, man. I can't even believe that exists. For those who don't know, go ahead, Andrew, explain it. That's where you can't deduct taxes, right? As like a normal business would.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. In the 1980s, there was a heroin or cocaine smuggler, I forget which, and he was a kind of a clever fellow. And so he got busted. And at that time, the IRS didn't really give a damn what you did for a living. You had to file a tax return for it. So that's how they busted a lot of the organized crime guys, was tax evasion. It wasn't for murder or extortion or anything of that, because they couldn't prove those cases, but they could prove tax evasion. And so 280, this guy, he smuggled all this weed, he got busted, and then he filed a tax return, and the IRS was forced to refund this guy millions of dollars, which he then used in his defense in his legal case.
Wow.
And that really pissed off the government. So they passed a law called IRS Code 280E. And that says that anybody that sells a controlled substance cannot deduct their normal business expenses from their tax return. And that was before medical cannabis was even thought of by Dennis Perone and that group of people in San Francisco. That was before legal cannabis was happening. That was before states were chartering and sanctioning and licensing these businesses. And so Harborside fought a case. So we fought a case against the IRS saying this is not fair. And we're still in court on that case. We've lost. We've lost that case over and over again. We're now at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I think the new owners of Harborside may try to settle that case. I hope they don't. I hope we keep fighting the case.
Keep fighting it. Yeah. That's an incredible story. I had no idea that that was the origination of where that bill came from.
And it's still being applied to all these cannabis companies. And what happens is you might have an EBITDA. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, and appreciation. You might have an EBITDA. Harborside has a nice EBITDA, you know, $8-10 million a quarter EBITDA. Very nice. 280E wipes it out. And all of a sudden, our EBITDA is negative, whatever it is now. It's like $500,000 or $1 million negative.
So crazy.
And then, of course, our investors get very upset. And they're like, we're negative. And I'm like, but look at the EBITDA, man. And they're like, well, okay, yeah, EBITDA is good. And they see the problem, and that's
you're
why
like, you're like, I can't overturn the legislation that's in place. Like,
well,
shit,
we're trying.
You know? Like,
I
know. Yeah, but I mean, like, it's not overnight. They got to understand that that's a factor into the earnings that you're getting, right? I mean, of course.
But they don't understand, and then they also don't understand why we have to spend millions of dollars in legal fees fighting the court case. They don't like that either. Why don't we just settle the thing and have certainty? That's what investors want. They want certainty because they want to know that they're going to start getting checks someday.
Right.
And the certainty allows them to model that out and know exactly when that will happen for them. So I think the new board will probably settle or at least debate settling pretty intensely at the board level. We'll see what happens. I certainly, all I can do is cheer them on from the sidelines at this point. And encourage them to fight. The opportunity is we give the judicial branch, so the federal government, a chance to go on record here. And if they go on record doing the wrong thing, history will judge them.
For sure.
History,
and they won't forget. Yeah.
History will not forget. History will not forget. And maybe all those people will be dead and gone and they won't care anymore at that point. But you know what? There's children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren they will.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Andrew. Man, you've been dropping some bombs today, some knowledge bombs, and I really appreciate having you on, man. I know that the audience truly appreciates it as well because they got a lot of great information. And I want to give you the floor. Is there anything that you want to close with as we wrap up here?
Well, we talked a lot about a lot of serious subjects today. So I would just say, remember, cannabis is fun. It's supposed to be shared and shared widely. We're not supposed to create intergeneration wealth with cannabis. We're really supposed to share that widely as we can. We can build an ecosystem where people do create intergenerational wealth, but not at the expense of small and medium players, particularly people of color and people who have been victims of the war on cannabis. Those folks need to find their little spot in the industry, and we have to help them. That's what I do as a strategic consultant. I dedicate a fair amount of my time to helping those folks. I hope everybody else will too. And then just my, two shameless plugs at the end. Please go to lastprisonerproject.org and help us with that very important work with social justice, and check out the other groups too, the Weldon Project, Cage Free Cannabis. There's a whole bunch of them. Google, support them, plug into this work. And if anybody out there, small, medium, large, you're in the industry, you're not in the industry, you care about cannabis, you care about this medicine, you want to get it in the hands of the people, you believe in some of the ethos that I've been describing and Kevin has been describing today, please reach out to me, andrewdeangelo.com or andrew@andrewdeangelo.com. I'd love to help you.
Awesome. Hey, well, you heard it from the man himself, Andrew DeAngelo. Thank you again. It's been an honor, and I want to have you back on again real soon as things evolve. If you're open to it.
Yeah, man. Maybe when we spring a few prisoners or something like that, me and my brother could come on together. That might be fun.
Yes, that would be great. I'd love to meet Steve as well.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for all your listeners today.